Hello there, YouTube. How are you doing? I'm doing quite well. I want you to watch very carefully as I die, fumbling my inputs like a complete rube. As you do so, remember those who slayed me. This episode will be a lengthy revenge plot, but we can't jump to the payoff. I mean, you can, but to keep larger society a polite society, we have to work towards the payoff. It's called a high trust society, but don't worry, I have an intermediary story to keep you enthralled during all these invasions that are on screen. If you want the build for this, it's in the second clip in my last video, the Rusty Return one. I will be rehearsing to you an old story I have adapted for modern audiences. The names and places have been changed to allow for ease of understanding. I hope you can learn a thing or two. There once was a wicked man who dissented from the North Country. He took with him a slew of loyal followers who were also disagreeable to the generally agreeable folk of the North Country. We will refer to this wicked man as Abaddon for now. Abaddon took his men to the South Country, a nation that is generally more disagreeable than the North Country, but they are an estranged sibling country nonetheless. Abaddon sought to rile up the southern countrymen and direct that anger at the North Country. This was somewhat successful, and the king of that South Country sent a proclamation throughout all his land to the people that they should gather themselves together again to go to battle against the North Country, a common pastime of the South Country. Yet, when the proclamation had gone to some parts of the South Country, many people were quite afraid, for two notable reasons. One, the North Country had a reputation for winning most of the wars the South Country waged against them, and two, the people feared to displease their king. Essentially a lose-lose situation, to fight and die on behalf of some talking heads, or die because of some talking head. Now the king was displeased at this apprehension and general disobedience to his decree. So the king of the South Country gave Abaddon command of what remained of his loyal army. He gave Abaddon this army so that he might go forth and compel his disobedient people to arms. This pleased Abaddon greatly, as this was according to his wicked and cunning plan, which plan was to dethrone the king of the South Country and rule it for himself. So Abaddon, with command of the army, who was in favor of the king, sought to gain favor with those citizenry who were far less amiable to the warmongering. These disobedient masses noticed that the army was coming. Figuring their death was at hand, the people fled to a place we'll call the fortress, a remarkably defensible place, believe it or not. It was even on top of a nice hill. The fortress could not be sieged and overtaken without considerable loss on Abaddon's part, so ordinary brute force would not be enough. The people of the fortress decided to appoint a man to be a king and a leader over the dissenting South Countrymen. This leader we will call Leopold. Leopold, leader of the fortress and the anti-war faction of the South Country. And this anti-war faction of the South Country were steadfast in their resolve to not be subjugated and forced to go to war against the North Country. So they entrenched themselves in the fortress with their armaments and their supplies and prepared for the worst that Abaddon could throw at them. However, it wasn't Abaddon's aim to fight against those in the fortress, despite what the king of the South Country expected of him and the loyalist army. It was Abaddon's desire to gain favor with both armies of the South Country, place himself at their head, and dethrone the king, and take control of the whole kingdom. So Abaddon had his army make a camp in a valley near the hill where the fortress was. When night came, Abaddon sent a secret embassy to the fortress, and the objective of this message was to convince Leopold, leader of the anti-war faction of the South Country, and king of the fortress, to come down to the foot of the hill so that Abaddon might speak with him. When Leopold received the message, he decided not to go down to the base of the hill. Abaddon was determined, and he sent another message to Leopold, asking if they could meet for a discussion. Again, Leopold declined. After a third message, Abaddon was again frustrated by Leopold's inaction. Abaddon realized that he could not get Leopold to come down from his hill, so he decided to personally climb the hill nearly all the way to the fortress. Abaddon again sent a message to Leopold, his fourth, mind you, requesting that Leopold come down from the fortress a short way and to be sure to bring his guards for a discussion. Understandably miffed at being pestered, but seeing no harm in it, Leopold acquiesced, bringing with him his honor guard to meet with Abaddon. So Abaddon shared with Leopold the following plan. Leopold, I would that you would come down with your army during the night, surround the men in their camps over whom the king of the South Country has given me command. I will deliver them up into your hands. The only thing I ask in return is that you make me your second in command. Leopold thought this was a grand idea. It would prevent war amongst his South countrymen, and place him in a place of considerable power, more than enough to defy the king of the South Country, and not go to war against the North Country, who seemed to win every conflict. So, Leopold went along with Abaddon's plan, surrounding the king's loyalists in the valley below the fortress hill, under the cover of darkness. When the loyalists woke up and found that they were surrounded, they pled with their leader Abaddon that they might fall in with their brethren, naturally, so they would not be destroyed. This is exactly what Abaddon wanted. And so, Abaddon delivered his men, contrary to the commands of the king of the South Country. Another step in his wicked plan to dethrone the king. Now, it was tradition amongst the South Country that if their chief leader was killed, to appoint the runner-up or second in command to be their chief leader. And so Abaddon caused one of his servants to administer poison by degrees to Leopold until he died. With Leopold dead, the South Countrymen appointed Abaddon to be their leader and chief commander. Having gained 2 whole armies, Abaddon marched his men to the doorstep of the king of the South Country, and the king came out to meet Abaddon with his servants, for he assumed that Abaddon had fulfilled his commands and gathered together so great an army to go against the North Country in battle. As the king went out to meet with his champion, Abaddon sent his own servants to go on ahead and to meet the king in advance. These servants bowed themselves before the king, as if to reverence him because of his greatness. And so the king reached forth his hand to raise these servants up, as it was the custom with the South Country, as a token of peace, a custom they had stolen from the moderately more noble North Country. While the king raised the first servant from the ground, he parried the king's gesture and stabbed the monarch right in the heart, and he fell to the earth. Now the servants of the king of the South Country fled, and the servants of Abaddon raised the alarm, saying, "Look, the servants of the king have stabbed him to the heart, and he has fallen, and they have fled. Behold, come and see." So Abaddon commanded that his army should march forth and to see what had happened to the king of the South Country. And when they had come to the spot and found the king lying in his gore, Abaddon pretended to be furious and said, "If any of you love the king, go and pursue these traitorous servants of the king." Now, when the servants of the king of the South Country saw an army pursuing after them, they were naturally terrified and fled into the wilderness. When the pursuing army returned, having failed to capture the framed traitors, Abaddon, by his fraud, gained the goodwill of the people. The following day, Abaddon entered the capital of the South Country with his armies and took control of the city. Now, when the queen of the South Country heard that her husband, the king, was slain, for Abaddon had sent an embassy to the queen informing her that the king had been slain by his servants, that he had pursued them with his army, but it was a lost cause, and the traitorous servants had made their escape. When the queen had received this message, she sent for Abaddon because she wished that he would bring witnesses with him to testify concerning the death of the king. And so Abaddon took the same servant that had slew the king and all of his fellow conspirators, and went to meet with the queen in the throne room of the palace. And each servant of Abaddon's testified that the king was slain by his own servants. The assassin himself spoke up during this meeting and said, "The servants have fled. Does this not testify against them?" And this satisfied the queen concerning the death of the king. And so Abaddon sought the favor of the queen, and took her unto himself to be his wife. And so we see that by his fraud, and by the assistance of his cunning servants, Abaddon obtained the kingdom. He was acknowledged as the king throughout all the land of the South Country. All the factions in the South Country, including the former king's loyalists and Leopold's anti-war faction, all recognized Abaddon as their king, king of the South Country, little-known deserter of the North Country. Now, you may be wondering why I took all that time to tell you this lengthy story where evil seems to reign supreme. Well, evil doesn't reign supreme. It's just a segment from a larger piece that I think sheds some light on some important principles. If it wasn't glaringly obvious before, Abaddon is an analog for either the devil or generic temptation, and regardless of your faith status, a true principle is found here. You probably aren't likely to fall for a large moral quandary or believe obvious lies. Therefore, Abaddon, or our analog for temptation, will instead use subtle lies and small temptations, and as many as possible until they snowball into a huge problem. That's a pattern we see in the story. The traitorous Abaddon urged Leopold to come down and meet him at the base of the hill. But when Leopold left the high ground, he was poisoned by degrees until he died, and his army fell into Abaddon's hands. Whether by argument, accusation, or exposure, some things may strive to bait you to leave your high ground. The high ground is where safety is, and the ability to remain an agent of free will, and not an object bound to addiction or depravity. That temptation could take many forms. It could be substance abuse, porn addiction, pride, thievery, or perhaps something more mundane like laziness. Whatever your temptation is, don't let it try to persuade you to leave your fortress where you are master of your own fate. You're not stupid enough to follow this temptation down into the valley with its army. However, don't be persuaded to leave your fortification even if you're only going a little ways down the hill, even with your guards with you, because the poison by degrees will kill you all the same. Learn from Leopold, and learn from the king of the South Country. Abaddon will wait and be patient. He's going to take your wife, given ample opportunity. Now, personally, I love that story. I really do. It makes me smile. It's a silly little thing. Heck, I wouldn't have shared it if I didn't like it so much, so that is a given. But I like the lesson it teaches us, the lesson that we ought to do what we can to stick to our principles, to not be fooled by little beguiling things, and to be wise with ourselves. I'll stop waxing philosophical on you, don't you worry. The moral bludgeoning will cease when morality improves. See what I did there? You probably don't care. Anyway, thank you for joining me for that little tale. I thought I would give it a swing and probably a miss and see how it went. It's just a funny little story. I adapted it a little bit to make the language cleaner. It's an old piece for sure, but I still rather like it. And don't worry, it's a part of a larger story. Abaddon eventually decides to go take his South Countrymen that he has obtained, so to speak, and he goes to war against the North Country, and it doesn't go so well. Mostly because the people of the North Country stick to their principles, and they're fairly wise, and Well, given that Abaddon was once a member of the North Country, it explains why he has the background to use his wisdom for evil, but ultimately evil will destroy itself in the end. I think that's a very Tolkien-esque interpretation of the world, that good doesn't necessarily destroy evil, that evil destroys itself invariably in the end. Speaking of destroying evil, the host of this world had a very naughty name. I did not approve of it. I'm not even certain if I should censor it on the screen. It's just some text. Dirty word, I would never use it. But I kept the invasion because I wanted to show you that the good guys win, even though people perceive the red bad man as the evil antagonist of your RPG story. In this case, we're the good guys. We're the good guys. We're part of the good guy squad. And so we're running, we get in here, and I don't know what this host was thinking what he's doing, but he's obviously Taunter Tongue. He's using the Taunter's Tongue, is what I'm trying to say. He has his buddy who's got the big chunky armor, the giant weapon, and the giant shield for whatever reason. Probably over-leveled. That's a lot of weight. You'd barely have damage. So speed up the footage, because the host is a-runnin'. And I thought this little invasion was great practice for me, because I was able to pull out the great bow, and I'll do so in a moment here. Pull out the great bow, and it's pretty useful if you have an open area for slowing down an opponent who keeps running. This usually only works if you have a teammate who can then, you know, capitalize on you hitting the enemy from a distance so that they can catch up quite nicely. And some of you are probably sitting here wondering, like, we get it, the guy has a bad name, you learned a thing, you always do this to us, Gunch. Why would you tell us there's a revenge plot here? You brought us here with this opening clip of you getting absolutely styled upon. Not really styled upon, but you getting destroyed because your inputs suck and you're bad at the game. These things are all true. I did do all of these things, and I did fail my inputs. And I'm leading up to the glorious revenge. Does the glorious revenge have much to do with the Aesopian tale I told you? No. Not directly. You might be able to draw a connection. I don't have one readily on hand prepared for you like some cooking show of morality, but hey, we'll get there. Don't worry. We have some tasty invasions for you, and I figured I shouldn't script the entire video. Heck, the story only got us so far. It's one of the reasons I like the Elden Ring and Soulsborne PvP so darn much. Every little fight is a unique story. Unique set pieces, interactions, people do the darndest things, have the wackiest gear, so many different combinations. We're able to slay dirty hosts who are using the Taunter's Tongue and using racial slurs as their username for some largely unexplained reason. For all the censoring this game does, I think it's funny how those ones will slip through. But the filter is so incredibly bare bones as to almost render it useless. But I digress. I'm not here to be a moral busybody on that issue. No. I've already exceeded my limit of moral busybodying, which is, you know, telling you to hopefully find a way to resist temptation. I didn't give you any tools for that. I just kind of told you how to spot it and hopefully recognize the tricks, the mental justifications that come to us when we are being tempted by something. Potato chips, deciding not to go to the gym, I don't know, your neighbor's plate of food when they're not looking. Could be anything, really. Gluttony. Gluttony's a sin. That's a sin, alright. But I had fun making this video. It was kind of fun drafting a little script. I had fun doing the invasions. And I was very pleased with the revenge clip that's coming up here. We're getting there. We're very close. It's up next, actually. Oh, boy. And let me tell you, this is a little foreshadowing, because being in the lake's full of water. If you walk in the water, your lightning resistance goes down. If you roll in the water, your lightning resistance goes down further. Lightning resistance only comes from your armor. You don't get flat defenses from leveling up. I mentioned that last video. If you're here and you didn't watch the last video, that's a little odd. But thanks for getting this far. My goodness. Thunderbolt, still a menace, but here we come full circle. I wanted you to remember those people who killed me, and you know what? You may not have really remembered what they looked like, so here's the clip again in front of you. They show up, I want to be friendly. I know I'm toast. These people are somewhere in the level 130 plus bracket, and they have their kit. We're in the middle of scenic nowhere. He's a great shield. I don't have my stuff ready. I'm thinking too much, making poor decisions like trying to menu right then and there. I get dusted. And so what happens? I get angry. I get spiteful. I decide to invade these folks. I bide my time. I wait for my opening. And just like Abaddon, I beckon to Leopold up on his fortress hill. I tell him to come down and discuss with me. Nothing bad will happen, good dear Leopold. I simply want to have a conversation. I only want to talk. Nothing bad's gonna happen. Just come down a little ways without your guards. Oh no. What are you gonna do without your buddy, your teammate? It's a kick. It's a riposte. It's that high lightning damage because he's soaking his ankles in water. And it's over. Revenge has been had. I thank you for joining me on this silly little jaunt, and I hope you have a good day. Bye-bye now.